Welcome to the Suncoast In-Depth Podcast. I'm Brett Watson, and I'm joined again by Ricardo, Aviles, and Dr. Troy Doucet. We're talking about the Universal Christ again, chapters 6 and 7 this time. I'm doing the two chapters, honestly. The main reason is because I want to stick to the schedule.
Yeah. Fair enough.
We had a couple of Thursdays where I couldn't be there, so we're going to go over the two, but it just so happens, they are closely tied to one another. So the first chapter is called A Sacred Wholeness. The second chapter, 7, is called Going Somewhere Good. So what I've done today is I've given you guys some of the workbook questions for those chapters and asked you to kind of pick one that stands out most to you, that you think is most worthy of discussion.
Okay.
In the little bit of time we have here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the lady Eddie
Hillesum.
Yeah. So she was a prisoner in Auschwitz.
Yes.
And ended up that's where she died.
Yeah.
Could you give me a little bit more of a backstory on that one?
Yeah, a young Jewish girl. He describes her as somebody that was full of life, and he gets this information, I guess, from her journal.
Okay.
And it's been turned into a book called An Interrupted Life. And he pulls some really extraordinary quotes from her journal as she wrestles with her circumstances and evolves due to those circumstances in a way that she arrives at what he's calling a sacred wholeness concerning herself, reality, God. So she's very comfortable with, this is extraordinary, he even calls her a different species, right? Because she has become even grateful for her horrific circumstances. As she put it, I have learned to love. So she's just this extraordinary Jewish girl that faced her great suffering and was dramatically transformed by that, so that she could love even in the midst of all of that. He also, well, actually, Karl Rahner, the theologian, refers to people like her as anonymous Christians, right?
Explain that.
Yeah, so an anonymous Christian is a person that, even if they don't call themselves Christians, they belong to an entirely different religion, let's say, they nonetheless exhibit the qualities of Christ. They show their growth. Their view of reality is that of Christ.
Gotcha.
And the oneness of all things and that sort of thing. So, anonymous Christians.
Okay, so give me just a quick, if you had to put an elevator pitch on the Sacred Wholeness chapter.
It's you asked me earlier if this summarizes the first book in the two of the Universal Christ, and I said no, he doesn't do that, but he really does. The Sacred Wholeness is about accepting reality as it is.
Yeah.
And growing from that. That accepting it is the first step in being transformed by it.
Okay.
And the 7th chapter is, remember, it's all going somewhere good, as we say. Good. No matter what your circumstances are, it's all going somewhere good. So that's a really short synopsis of those chapters. All of us have experience with great love, great suffering, and can recognize, if we're honest, if we'll accept reality for what it is, we can see the transformative power of those two things, which are oftentimes two sides of one coin.
Right.
To greatly love something is also to run the risk of losing that something or someone, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's I'm going to probably butcher this because you're the philosopher in the room. Isn't there a Young quote that for a tree to reach heaven, its roots have to go down to hell? Is that Young?
I don't know if that's Young.
I don't know.
I believe it is, and I could be wrong. But
Sounds like him, for sure.
It's a really beautiful quote because it shows the, there's a lot of different ways to interpret that line. For a tree to grow to heaven, its roots have to go down to hell.
Mm-hmm.
To truly appreciate the good things in life, you have to lose them sometimes.
Have you watched The Rings of Power?
I have. Yeah.
So remember the scene where Galadriel is a little girl?
Uh-huh.
And her brother talks to her about light and darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's in the beginning. Yeah.
And so he ends up saying this: sometimes to see the light best, we have to first touch the darkness.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So same idea.
Yeah.
So like for I'm butchering her name, Edie.
Eddie. At least that's how it's pronounced in the audiobook.
Right. So, so you're talking about, I don't know that you can get into more of a hell-like situation than being a prisoner in Auschwitz, knowing that you're going to die. The people around you are starving to death. Your family's in there with you.
Yeah.
And they're starving to death. They're being put in gas chambers. And for her to be able to look past the circumstance and the evil that surrounds her and still see the good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an extreme example of how we should be living our lives today.
It really is.
There's always things that are going to be bad. There's always suffering around us.
Mm-hmm.
And we can choose to focus on those things, but we can also choose to focus on the good. And that's where it is a balance. It's not an ignorance towards suffering. Just because you're not saying like, oh, I'm just going to ignore that those people over there are suffering. Like, yeah, identify that those people are suffering, but where can I find the good in those situations?
Mm-hmm.
It's like that old Mr. Rogers quote. He tells this story. He's sitting in front of a TV, something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was something really bad that had happened. And he's watching with his mother, and he was a child. And he's like, I just can't believe this is happening. This is so terrible. And his mother just says, look for the helpers. And what she was saying in that moment is like, yes, there is something terrible that happened, but there are good people in there that are helping. And those are the things that you need to focus on. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. It's not an ignorance to the suffering, but it is also, let's focus on the good things that are happening too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that sounds kind of pie in the sky, doesn't it? I mean, and a lot of people would complain about what you just said.
Sure.
Say, sure. Yeah. Easy for you to say when you're not going through suffering. But look, man, I mean, look at your own life and you can see the value of it.
100%.
If you're being honest.
Yeah.
So
there's something, I watched Yellowstone the other night, and
don't spoil it. Is it the new season?
It's really
Okay.
awesome. And these two cowboys are sitting under a tree. They're bringing in all these calves to brand them, and there's no beds or anything. They just have to hardcore move them through these valleys. And Kevin Costner lays down to this old cowboy, and he starts dozing off, and he's like, "Hope you don't mind my snoring." And Kevin Costner looks over, he goes, "My dad told me if a man can't sleep through another man snoring, he's just not tired enough." And I think of trials, and I'm going to say this Sunday at church, man, there's some trials, temptations, tribulations, we're called to resistance, like fight against that. But then there's some you're called to acceptance. And many times we get it confused. And I think with Eddie's story, this is a point where she goes, this is not something that's called for a need of resistance, but acceptance. And I think it's in that moment transformation happens. Like, to call her a new species is a compliment to say, like, if you're suffering and you can't see the helpers or the good, then like the cowboy, you're just not tired enough. You've just not suffered enough. And it's hard to say that, dude, because that removes for me the pie in the sky mentality. It's like, you just haven't suffered enough. Because if all you still see is the pain, then you haven't suffered enough. Because like I look at these guys who, getting ready for the Olympia, and dude, they are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
They look like the strongest they've ever been.
But they're weak.
But they were absolutely weak. And this woman, Eddie, you read her story in Rohr's book and even her own testimony. She looks super strong to us, but yet she's absolutely weak. But what's the promise? The mystic of God's promises, when you're the weakest, is when you will realize and recognize that's when the God in you is the strongest. And I think that's the whole idea of this wholeness, is where it's all connected. And when I resist some things that I should accept, I'm in contradiction to the nature of reality. And when I accept some things I should resist, I'm in the same sort of contradiction. So it's being attuned to that oneness, to that wholeness that says, let me accept this reality and become the helper, or whatever the case
whatever
may
I'm
be.
being changed to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Accept that reality, that transformation.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, to kind of piggyback off of that, is if you see someone that is in the midst of pain and suffering, it almost inspires you more to help them. And that's our call as a community and as Christ followers, is like, if I see someone that's fallen, I'm going to help them get back up. An amazing example, my sister just moved down to Florida. In her first week in Florida, her house catches on fire and she loses half of her things. She loses her car. And this is all within, she's changing jobs and she just moved. And then her house catches on fire. And my sister is the strongest, one of the strongest people I know. That girl has been through so much in her life. And she has continuously beat the odds and continued to move forward and to continue to be successful in her life. And I 100% believe it's her mentality and the way she approaches life. She literally texted me the day after it happened, "Hey, exclamation point, house caught on fire last night, lost half of our stuff, LOL, but we're okay, we're in a hotel." Like, she had like this lightness about something that would just be super traumatic.
Yeah.
And what she was telling me was, when they got out of the house, it was in the middle of the night. They got out of the house, and all of her neighbors, who she hasn't even met yet because she just moved into the neighborhood, all of her neighbors came out, and they have a dog, so some neighbors brought some like dog food and water for them. They were in their night clothes, so they like barely had anything on, so like neighbors were bringing them clothes. And then one of the neighbors didn't even tell them, who was in military, booked them a room at a hotel and said, here, go to this hotel, you already have a reservation, go ahead and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
And then our community came around her and is allowing her to use a car that we have here, and we're trying to help her in every way we can. And those are the things that those are the stories she tells, like the people that came around her and helped. Those are the things that she focuses on, because you can stay in that suffering. You can be like, ugh, I can't believe this happened to me, and all this kind of stuff, and just wallow in it. And I think there is a time that you have to sit in the suffering and understand, like, what can I learn from this? Because if you ignore the suffering and you try to get out of it as quickly as possible, then you haven't really taken the time to learn from the suffering. But sitting in it, but not staying in it, identifying what the suffering is, what are the lessons that I can learn from it, but then also on the flip side of that, focusing on the things that are positive that came out of that. And that's what, my sister's doing, what Edie obviously is doing.
Yeah.
That it is it's the Stoics, mentality.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure Richard is tapped into the Stoic philosophy as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it anyway.
There's so much that's right there.
Yeah.
And so people respond to suffering, it seems to me anyway, in one of three ways, right? Acceptance with action, denial. There are people that do a really bang up job of just denying that that's even reality.
Yeah.
Not even just the suffering of others. I know people in my life that just deny the suffering that they are experiencing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of like pretending that it's not there, and that's not good either, right?
100%.
And then there's just the bitterness, right? That's the third way that I see people
Yeah.
responding to it. Like, yeah, well, the world sucks.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
This
you
is
can
where-
sit in that, and
You can,
you
man.
can live a very miserable life if you sit in that.
And social media just kind of feeds it, doesn't it?
I mean, yeah, like a lot of forms of media. I mean, there's,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just there's always, if you're looking for it, there's always going to be something bad for you to focus on.
And that's the thing with social media is the algorithms are literally designed to keep feeding you the stuff that you were just feeding on.
Yeah, yeah,
To
100%.
gorge you with it, you know.
I mean, my wife's a therapist, and her number one thing to people, especially when they're in this deep, dark place, is get off of social media, stop watching the news,
Yep.
get outside, do something positive, go and talk to your neighbors, like socialize with your friends, like do things that will bring joy to your life, because first of all, it's not real, and second, like you can, if you're looking for suffering, if you're looking for pain, if you're looking for bad news, it's really easy to find.
Oh, yeah.
It's really easy to find because there is a lot of suffering in the world.
There is. So one of the interesting things that Eddie Hillesum says is this. Alas, she's speaking to God. Alas, there doesn't seem to be much you yourself can do about our circumstances, about our lives. Neither do I hold you responsible. You cannot help us. But we must help you and defend your dwelling place inside us to the last. What do you think of that? So to her, God seemed powerless in her circumstances. Agree, disagree?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if God could do something and he's choosing not to, seems like a pretty horrific God. Yeah. Right?
And yet she doesn't see him that way at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sees him as someone who actually should be defended
Yeah.
in those circumstances, indwelling her, and that dwelling place should be defended, so that God even needs protection in her mind somehow. So that's just something. How do you?
It seems like she's tapped into a next level of enlightenment that
Yes.
we should all be striving for.
Yeah.
So listen to this. This is from Rohr. I read his meditations
Yeah.
every day. So there's no doubt that suffering and violence abound in the crevices of life, but suffering is not a punishment of a vengeful God. God does not abandon us. We abandon God by running after little gods. God lives deep within us as the center of love, but we often are dismissive of this inner center and are drawn away by the powers of the little gods like success, status, wealth, comfort, everything we created for ourselves. The theodicy question, so theodicy is how do I defend God
Yeah.
in the face of evil? Like why if you're all powerful, you could do something, and if you're all loving, you should do something. Well, that's a very human projection, right? But he says this, the theodicy question is not why God allows bad things to happen to good people, but why do we abandon God in the face of our own suffering? So that's the real question, is not why does God abandon us, but why do we long to abandon him?
Yeah.
And so it flips the question onto us as to what are we not seeing in our suffering that we should.
And we see a lot of this happening with this deconstruction movement that's taking place within Christianity. Not just Christianity, actually. If you look at other religions, they're all experiencing this. And deconstruction is just the deconstructing old belief systems. But what you see, at least in the people that my wife follows on TikTok, social media, is the majority of them deconstruct their old, typically the people she follows are evangelicals, they deconstruct their old belief systems and they just throw it all out.
Yeah.
And they become agnostic or even militant atheist as a result. And that's one of the things that really bothers me. Not because I'm a pastor and my living is earned, being one and that sort of thing. I'm not afraid of atheism, but I see the negative consequences that atheism can bring, not to all atheists, but to many.
Sure.
And you see it in a lot of these men and women that are deconstructing, and you watch them on TikTok. They're quick to trash what I would call the straw men, the weak points of their old belief systems, but then are left with a kind of emptiness that I just see as radically unnecessary. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You guys obviously have deconstructed. You've gone through the loss, the suffering that is experienced in that, but you did not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Why?
You want to go first?
No, go ahead, man.
There were certain aspects of this whole thing that I couldn't deconstruct. I couldn't get a solid explanation for. And there were moments, whether it be spiritually or just this presence, that I just knew, like, because I flirted with all of that. I flirted with atheism. I flirted with nihilism. I opened that door. And what I found was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and very little hope. And I rely on hope. Like, I truly believe there is hope as a driver for us to continue forward. So what I could rationally look at as my faith, and, obviously, like, all of these things, these pillars that were, like, holding up my faith needed to come down. And I just knew, like, there's something there. There's something spiritual. Like, I grew up charismatic, in that realm. So the mystical experiences that I've had, and I still do have every Sunday when I feel this oneness with everyone, there's that spirit of Christ that I can't let go. Like,
it's an experience.
It's an experience. And sure, we can debate all day on different theological talking points, but that doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me are the moments of beauty that I have with another human being that I'm like, man, this is Christ. Christ is here. Like, I was going through some tough stuff a couple days ago. And, there's this moment, like, my wife came up beside me and she gave me these words of encouragement. And then literally, my phone was on silent, and a buddy of mine calls me and leaves me a voicemail. And he's just like, hey, man, just want to let you know you were on my heart today. I just want to tell you I love you, and you're the man. And I just started bawling, because it's like, those are the things, like, that's the beauty where I see Christ, is like those moments. You can't explain it. He hasn't called me in a month. Like, how the hell did he know to call me in that exact moment? There's this connection that we have, and I truly believe that's Christ, and I can't let those things go. And I think what Christianity can be is really, really amazing. Yes. And if we can learn to let go of all this other stuff, the things that really don't matter, and learn to lean into the spirit of Christ that Rohr talks about so beautifully, like, that could change the world.
Oh, yeah.
And what he's saying about suffering, the other point that I was going to make too is that when you go through something, when you are suffering and you come out of it, and you look at people around you and you see, oh, I've been there. I know what I can imagine what you're going through. It inspires you more to help. And it inspires you more to be there for those people when you, like, I know the pain you're going through, and I'll help you walk through it. Like, that right there, that's the spirit of Christ. And so then you can look back and, like, man, I wouldn't wish my suffering on anybody, but I'm so glad I went through it, because I'm now able to help people that are going through the same situation.
Yeah, there's a reason that Rohr named the center out in New Mexico the Center for Action and Contemplation. And he describes it as this feedback loop that taking the action leads to thinking, but thinking also leads to action. You have to, it can't end with simply thinking, like you were saying earlier. Right. And that piece there, what you were just describing, is exactly what, that's the corollary. That's what happens when I accept reality as it is instead of denying it or trying to erect these hedges, these protective walls around a perfectly ordered garden. The concept of utopia is just doomed to failure.
100%.
It can't work. The person who thinks that they've achieved a perfect order to their life and they've avoided all suffering and so on will find themselves without meaning and therefore purpose.
Yeah.
You know. So
we're kind of going through something like that with Leighton right now. She is she's extremely risk averse. She's terrified of getting sick. She's terrified of bugs. She's terrified of, you know, she's having a little bit of just anxiety. And you know, we are having to push her a little bit on, like, life is about risk. Living life is about risk. Every time you walk out the door, I mean, there's something could happen to you in here. Like, there's always going to be risk of pain and suffering. And if you don't have that risk of pain or suffering, that literally means you're probably just sitting in an isolated room with no sharp objects, with perfectly clean air, but you're living a miserable life because you could never leave. Because you know what? I'm at least safe in here. That's not living. And that's the same idea with utopia. For there to truly be like life and experiences, you have to run the risk of chaos and suffering.
Yeah. So do you think that heaven includes those risks? What we think of as heaven?
You know, I don't know. I've never thought about that before.
It would have to. It would have to. You know, it would have to include the same.
I think so too.
Sorts of risk. You know, otherwise that's the utopia. And Nietzsche's written about this, you know, substantially in his corpus. Like, the whole idea beyond good and evil is this notion that the most unethical thing we do is to not live within a reality that affirms both structure and order and rationality, as well as disorder, the chaotic, and the risk necessary in order to have a meaningful life, you know? So that's a beautiful thing. Nietzsche says there is no good and evil, you know? There just isn't. There's just a misunderstanding of the nature of both that, you know, like I say, you know, without fear, there can be no bravery. Like, there cannot be. We wouldn't even know what that is.
Yep.
And it's the tension of truth between what seems contradictory to the human mind is that we have elevated this notion of structure, order, rationality as being the quintessential piece of human existence, right? That's why I hate Plato. That's why Socrates, like, that's what they did. Descartes, they tried to, you know, raise human rationality. Whereas I go, you know, even the Stoics do it to some extent, right? They want to remove emotion. They want to remove. And I go, no, but that's a necessary piece of the holistic aspect or element of existence itself, is to embrace ambiguity, to embrace contradiction, to embrace pain and suffering along with, you know, success and beauty. Like, all of these things create that holistic life that is God, you know, like that's the thing, you know. When I preached a couple of weeks ago, I talked about this idea, like, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that earth in itself was chaotic, tohu vavohu, and the Spirit of God hovered. In other words, what was it, harav? It doesn't mean he removed the chaotic; he relaxed it.
Yeah.
To make room for the order, for the structure. And we don't like that, man. And that was part of my deconstructive process. Was I was trained educationally, theologically, to reject any notion of the law of non-contradiction, right? That does not befit the Aristotelian profile of what is constant and consistent and true. And I go, no. there must be an embrace of like this is possible. Like there is no certainty. The only thing certain is uncertainty.
Yeah. This is the basis of, I've talked to you about Raymond Moody's, like the father of near-death experience research, right? And he lives in Bradenton now. And so we've had him on Thursday night a couple of times. And he, one time we went to dinner with him and he said, I really want to work on a book called The Theory of Nonsense. And it's exactly what you're talking about, right? And this is why I said before that there's a lot that's right in Stoicism, but not all of it.
No, definitely
exactly,
not. Yeah.
For the reasons you said. And we need that chaos, and we need the nonsensical in order to really grow into what we're, what I would say we're even destined to be. And
I think I think the extreme of Stoicism, people lean on it too much to where it's like, it almost is like it's an excuse for inaction.
Yeah,
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like, well, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. There's maybe something you can do about it.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's oftentimes the irrational, the emotional side that moves you to do something.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. The in Taoism, well, Taoism is one religion that utilizes this symbol a lot. It's the yin yang symbol. I think it was Peterson actually that pointed out that, look, what they say about this is that meaning is found in that line.
Yeah,
or
that's
the tension,
Peterson.
as you said before.
Yeah.
Meaning is found in that line between the chaos and the order.
Yeah.
We need them. We need them both.
Yeah.
But chapter 7 is simply saying that, look, it's also important to remember that it's all leading somewhere good, as we say. I get what Nietzsche is saying, but we still use these terms, right?
Yeah.
It's all leading to something more whole. He quotes Augustine, you can have the spiritual person experiences as they grow a compassionate dissatisfaction. And what he means by that is,
go on.
as Augustine points us out, that look, everything in life is worshipped until you have it, and it loses its magic.
Oh,
right?
sure. Yeah.
But that can't happen with the eternal.
Yeah.
So that dissatisfaction is always leading to a higher satisfaction.
Right.
But that's where the throwing the baby out with the bathwater really bothers me for people, is because they place themselves in a situation where they're constantly just dissatisfied spiritually, and they don't need to be. The eternal is exactly that.
Yeah.
He's eternal. There's always more to know. There's always more to grow, and so on. So
It correlates with there's this old joke, the guy's talking about like old gospel songs that were, sung and written by slaves, and the big theme in a lot of those songs is like, like, oh, I'll fly away, like this, this hope and this burning desire to go to the next life because their current life is so miserable, and now when you see like country songs or new Christian songs, like, yeah, we'll get to heaven one day. Like everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go there now. Is kind of the theme.
And that's what's ironic, right? That it's available right now.
Yeah.
And in fact, the overwhelming emphasis that Jesus has in his ministry is, it's here. Be a part of it.
Right.
Bring it.
Yeah.
Establish it in your own life and for the lives around you.
Yep.
So,
Really
this was really good.
Yeah, it's good, man.
Yeah, appreciate
really
it.
good.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to give 5 copies of the Kindle version of it.
Nice.
Ooh, very cool.
It's kind of a birthday, Christmas gift.
Yeah, man.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you guys.
Enjoy it.